extremely disturbing. The man accused of murdering a Milwaukee mother and her 2 children confesses to the crime and details his actions to try future tragedy. She joins us live.
Arzelle Ivory, today court documents were released showing that he is now charged with 3 felony crimes of first-degree intentional homicide. Now, when it comes to him, the things that he detailed in this criminal complaint that he supposedly admitted to were just gory, troubling, and heartbreaking. So, of course, we are not going to share those details due to the graphic nature of this crime.
This is the story of Amarah Jerica Banks, a 26-year-old mother of 3 who lost her life in a tragedy that would shake the Milwaukee community to its core. In the early hours of February 8, 2020, what began as an argument ended in an unthinkable act of violence that would claim not only Jerica's life, but also the lives of her 2 young daughters. This is a story of loss, systemic failure, and a community's desperate search for answers. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city known for its rich cultural heritage and diverse neighborhoods, sits majestically on the western shores of Lake Michigan. Here, in the Sunset Heights area, a middle-class neighborhood of well-maintained homes and tight-knit communities, Jerica Banks built a life for herself and her children. But beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful setting, a darkness was brewing that would eventually erupt into violence. Amarah Jerica Banks, known simply as Jerica to those who loved her, was born on March 14, 1993, to Akon and Valeria Banks. A bright and talented young woman, she proudly graduated from Milwaukee High School of the Arts, where she distinguished herself both academically and in her creative pursuits. While she worked diligently at Fraudtert Hospital, Jerica's true passion and purpose in life was being a mother to her 3 children, 5-year-old Arzelle Ivory, 4-year-old Amarah Banks, and her youngest, 1-year-old Arzelle Ivory Jr. The father of her children, 26-year-old Arzelle Ivory, worked as a security guard. Their relationship, spanning several years, was marked by moments of joy, but increasingly overshadowed by tension and conflict. The death of their youngest child, Arzelle Jr., from complications of asthma, cast a heavy shadow over their already strained relationship. The loss of their son would become the catalyst for events that would spiral into tragedy. The fatal sequence of events began on February 7, 2020, following the funeral of their 1-year-old son. What should have been a time of shared grief and mutual support instead became the backdrop for a horrific crime. The tension between Jerica and Arzelle reached a breaking point over his decision to return to work immediately after their son's funeral. No one could have predicted that this argument would lead to such devastating consequences. In the early hours of February 8th, the quiet of the Milwaukee night was shattered by desperate screams that would haunt witnesses for years to come. Neighbors watched in horror as Jerica Banks, bleeding from her mouth and barefoot in the cold Milwaukee winter, tried to flee from her apartment. Her final words would later pierce the hearts of investigators and family members alike. These desperate pleas echoed through the night as Ivory dragged her back into the apartment building. At 1:51 a.m., a terrified neighbor made what would prove to be a fateful call to 911. The witness reported the brutal scene unfolding before them. A woman running for her life, bleeding, without even shoes to protect her feet from the frozen ground. Despite the clear urgency of the situation, a series of critical mistakes in the emergency response system would prove fatal. When police finally arrived, they couldn't locate the 911 caller, a tragic missed opportunity that would forever haunt those involved. The 911 operator, Kristen St. Pierre, made a decision that would later come under intense scrutiny. She classified the call as a lower priority case, rather than recognizing it as an active domestic violence situation. This misclassification set in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences. The responding officers, Shahir Salati and Nicholas Kuka, didn't arrive until 2:20 a.m., and in a decision that would haunt them, they remained in their squad car, failing to conduct a proper investigation before leaving the scene at 2:35 a.m. By the time help should have arrived, Jerica Banks and her daughters were already dead. Arzelle Ivory, in a calculated attempt to cover his crimes, transported their bodies to a garage near West Burleigh Street. There, in a final act of cruelty, he attempted to destroy evidence of his crimes by setting fire to the bodies, still wrapped in the memorial shirts worn at his son's funeral just hours before. The following day, February 9th, marked the beginning of what would initially be treated as a missing persons investigation. As police began their inquiry, the horrifying scope of the disappearance became clear. Not only was Jerica missing, but her 2 young daughters had vanished as well. Yet even with 3 lives hanging in the balance, precious time was lost as the case wound its way through bureaucratic channels. It wasn't until the disappearance of the children was confirmed that an Amber Alert was finally issued, mobilizing wider law enforcement resources. The break in the case came from an unexpected direction: Memphis, Tennessee. Local law enforcement there contacted Milwaukee police with crucial information about Ivory, who had been last seen with Banks and her daughters. But by then, Ivory had already fled, harboring plans to start a new life and escape the consequences of his actions. The break in the case came when Arzelle confessed to his father in Memphis, who immediately contacted the authorities. His confession revealed the horrifying details of that night: how he had strangled Jerica after pushing her head into the wall multiple times, then proceeded to take the lives of his own daughters, Zaina and Amarah. He claimed he kissed them and told them he loved them before ending their lives, a detail that would later send chills through the courtroom. The discovery of their remains in the garage sent shockwaves through the Milwaukee community. Family members gathered for a vigil, their grief and anger palpable as they revealed the history of violence that had preceded this tragedy. Jerica's sister, Nisha Smith, spoke of regular abuse that had gone unreported and unaddressed, painting a picture of systematic failure to protect a vulnerable family. The case exposed deep flaws in Milwaukee's emergency response system. The 911 operator resigned amid criticism for her handling of the call. The responding officers were initially fired, but later reinstated with suspensions after appealing to the Fire and Police Commission. These disciplinary actions, while significant, could not bring back the lives lost due to these institutional failures. The legal proceedings revealed the full extent of Arzelle Ivory's calculated attempts to conceal his crimes. Prosecutor Grant Hubner detailed how Ivory had methodically cleaned the crime scene using bleach, leaving investigators with little evidence when they first searched Banks' apartment: just a hole in the wall and a single drop of blood on a napkin. It wasn't until a cadaver dog was brought in that they discovered the true horror beneath the carpet, where the floor was soaked with blood. Ivory had even considered dismembering the bodies before ultimately deciding to burn them instead. In April, Ivory pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Under Wisconsin state law, this meant a mandatory life sentence. The only question remaining for Judge Stephanie Rothstein was whether to allow the possibility of extended supervision in the future. Ivory's defense attorney, Travis Schwantes, argued for the possibility of supervised release after 40 years, citing his client's schizophrenia diagnosis, past suicide attempts, and lack of prior criminal convictions. Though it emerged he had been previously arrested in 2018 for domestic violence against Banks, though charges were never filed. The sentencing hearing brought raw emotion to the surface as family members confronted the man who had destroyed their lives. "I wake up every day crying, knowing that I wish I was there to save her, to help her," Tamika Smith, Banks' sister, told the court through tears. "But I thank God that we're getting our justice today." David Fields Jr., Banks' brother, delivered a powerful statement that cut to the heart of the tragedy. "Evil is being sentenced here today, and that evil is you," he declared, his voice heavy with grief. I can't hear my sister's voice anymore, and I can't hear my niece's laugh anymore. It tears my heart to shreds." Ivory offered an apology to the court, expressing regret for his actions, but his words rang hollow in the face of his horrific crimes. Judge Rothstein, calling the murders horrendous, sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of supervised release. Justice had been served, but for the Banks family, no punishment could fill the void left by the loss of Jerica and her daughters. The murders of Jerica Banks and her daughters, Zana and Amarah, represent more than just a tragic crime. They stand as a testament to the devastating consequences of domestic violence and the critical importance of proper intervention. The case sparked reforms in Milwaukee's emergency response procedures, but for Jerica's family, these changes came too late. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the Banks family gathered at the Sojourner Family Peace Center, a shelter and service provider for domestic violence victims, to address the media and thank the community for their unwavering support. Gerald Farinas, speaking as the family's spokesman, acknowledged the public's role in their pursuit of justice. "You made your own calls for justice on behalf of Jerica and her babies, and they were heard." The case stands as a chilling reminder of how domestic violence can escalate to unthinkable tragedy. The community's response, while unable to bring back Jerica and her daughters, has created a legacy of awareness and action. The void left by their loss serves as a stark reminder of the price paid when warning signs go unheeded and calls for help go unanswered. The story of Amarah Jerica Banks is not just a tale of tragedy, it's a call to action. It challenges us to examine how we respond to domestic violence, how we protect the vulnerable, and how we ensure that no other family has to endure such a devastating loss. In the end, the greatest tribute we can pay to Jerica, Zana, and Amarah is to learn from their story and work tirelessly to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future.